Hey, superstars, welcome back to another episode of Word Up with Danny Katz. Whew, this show warrants a lengthier preamble than usual. Today I'm interviewing the founder of the LA Weekly, a dear friend of mine, and someone who I consider one of my journalism mentors, Jay Levin. Jay has a very different perspective and bent than most of the guests I've had on my podcast, and it's just a whole different thing, and I think it's really valuable on a lot of different levels. So Jay Levin has been, he started the LA Weekly back in 1978. I was not at the LA Weekly at the same time as Jay. However, Jay and I were friends and colleagues throughout my time at the Weekly, and I do feel like he had an impact on my journalism career. I was also the copy manager for Jay's short-lived magazine, Real Talk LA, and I did contribute to that. So we did work together, journalist, editor in that capacity. As you follow me, you know that I've been heartbroken about the censorship situation for a long time. And it's not just that it's, interfering with my own income stream and signals the demise of our culture and our constitutional republic. The gaslighting that goes along with it, I find to be particularly crazy making in the denial that it's happening, right? It's just like another layer of this psychological torture that we're all enduring, right? Left, right, center, apathetic, we're all undergoing some serious psychological attack. This is just a particular piece of my own version of it that has been really hard on me. I reached out to Jay, and my invitation was, hey, would you like to come on the podcast to talk about censorship as well as the social emotional learning work that you're doing? Because after Jay left journalism, he really put his heart and soul into social emotional learning. So Jay agreed to come on the podcast, and this was our podcast. And obviously I was more interested in discussing the state of journalism and censorship. And as you'll see in this conversation, that was a really weird conversation. And the reason that I'm putting this out, despite some misgivings, is to give us a bird's eye view of the landscape, right? Like, my podcast can sometimes be slanted with people who are parroting many, not all, but many similar worldviews that I myself espouse. Jay is coming from a completely different worldview. And what I think is most interesting about this conversation are the walls up around the censorship conversation, are the denial, are how distracted Jay is. For anyone watching this on a screen, you'll see Jay multitasking throughout the entire stilted, completely unsatisfying, but also very illuminating and very revelatory part of our conversation that focused on journalism. If you're listening, just know that while we were having that conversation, Jay was not making eye contact with me and seemed to be doing other things on the computer until he decided that he didn't even want to talk about it anymore. So, and then he gets into the social emotional learning, which I also realize is, there's a lot of controversy around it, and I understand why. And I also think it's valuable to hear Jay's perspective. I can vouch for the fact that Jay is an incredibly well-intended, loving, beautiful man, right? So I know that, for the people who are criticizing social emotional learning as a way of slipping Marxism into the culture, I think that's beyond valid. And Jay actually speaks to it. But I also just want to broaden the conversation, and humanize the conversation and point to some of the paradoxes in the conversation. This was an interesting one. It was a little hard on my heart. I didn't get the big breakthrough out of it that I keep idealistically and probably, delusionally hoping for. And, I'm really interested in your feedback on this one, because I think it shows a lot of the blockages that we're dealing with right now, and a lot of that polarization that seems to be keeping us from moving forward as a culture. All right, that does it for my little preface to this conversation with Jay Levin. Before we dive in, I am reminding you to click the subscribe button, to like, to share, to comment. As you're wanting to track my every next video drop, podcast episode, the impending launch of my book, the courses and webinars and live events that I do, your best way to keep apprised of all that is to subscribe to my newsletter at dannycatz.com. I've heard a lot of people saying that Google has taken it upon themselves to unsubscribe them from my YouTube channel, that YouTube has been suppressing my content, making it hard to find. So, still subscribe, still hit the notification bell. It's probably wise to take action steps to navigate towards my YouTube channel to keep abreast of what I'm doing. And when you sign up for my newsletter, you'll definitely be able to stay in my loop. This channel is not monetized. I'm not getting any money from YouTube or Google, so you're not being bombarded by ads. I don't have any advertisers sponsoring my show. This show is a labor of love. So the only funds that are coming in to support me continuing to do this work are from your donations on Patreon and on Locals. So if you're finding any value at all from this podcast, from the content I put out, consider donating at either Patreon, Locals, or both, where for as little as $5 a month, you will get access to all of my second half conversations, plus lots of extra stuff. All right, that does it for housekeeping. Thanks for enduring this rather lengthy preamble, and prepare to enjoy my conversation with LA Weekly founder, Jay Levin. Curious, as a friend, as one of my mentors in journalism, as the founder of the LA Weekly, which I know you founded in 1978, how you're feeling about journalism in 2023. What is your take on that landscape?
Well, I mean, journalism is all over the place because it's so spread out and thinned out now. We're both spread out and thinned out. More people consider themselves journalists. More websites start up with considered of journalism. But overall, it's pretty appalling. It's, for the investigative stuff, everybody's relying on two or three sources, right? To be accurate. They're not always picking up on each other. I mean, the major, the Washington Post will pick up on the New York Times, et cetera. But out there in the hinterlands, 91% of talk news is controlled by the right wing, thanks to Reagan and the oligarchs. So a lot of what's happening out there and people across the country is fake news, false news, magnified by the pressures of people's absorption in social media and where they think they're getting the news that's responsible. The American public has become super lazy, if it's not in terms of fact checking or finding fact checking sources. That doesn't support it. Local journalism, which is so important, is weakened by in a major ways, because local also will reflect national. So by the loss of local community newspapers and cutbacks in daily city newspapers and their work. So overall, it's not a healthy situation. Yeah.
Where do you get your news from?
I get my news from selective sources I trust, including the business press. The business press actually does better journalism on a lot of important issues than you would suspect. Like Bloomberg is a good source of journalism. So there's things I learned to trust from them. I belong to a society, a male group, that male brotherhood, where we try to find the best information in the world and share it with each other, most reliable. Just one of the elements of it, so we get it from there. In terms of specific sources. Yeah, I still punt towards the left-wing sources. I mean, there's a group called Portside Snapshot that very few people have heard about. It does some really deep, good stuff, and I use a lot of the other. I test out a lot of the other stuff. The best insightful journalism from a single human being, probably probably remains Seth Abramson's work on Twitter and Substack. And his own sources are usually pretty reliable, but you got to hunt and peck. You know, I had a conversation with somebody from Florida, from the South yesterday, and who's immersed in right-wing media and journalism, and it was revealing because the emotional attachment to being right around that stuff is very profound. So I gave him a couple of examples of things he believed that were totally, absolutely not so, and I gave him the sources where he could find out it's not so. And he reacted with surprise. But because he knows he's spent some time with me and trusts me, he said, I'm really going to follow up on this because I don't want to be fooled by anybody. So, but there's a lot of fooling going on. So that's what I think about journalism now.
Did you ever think that you would see, I mean, A, censorship, period, but B, this degree of censorship in your lifetime?
I've always seen censorship. I mean, I started an alternative newspaper because, you know, I was a New York journalist. I got to see what the New York Times wouldn't cover. I traveled the world. So I became informed about American imperialism. One of the things we did with the LA Weekly was when I was running it, and we covered Central America very well and American imperialism there, and you know, in El Salvador, you know, many village massacres by the Altacal Brigade, which was basically formed and led by special forces. And we blew it up and made a major deal of it, and the grassroots organizations grabbed it because our reporting was very authentic about it. But the LA Times guy who's covering it, the State Department did a little bit of it, and pretty quickly he was removed from it. So I was very used to censored journalism all my life, even from the big guys. And it's one of the reasons I got to create an alternative newspaper. Major reason I created an alternative newspaper.
So in your estimation, is where we're at now not really that different from the censorship situation when you were at the Weekly?
There's more oligarchic control of false information than ever before. It's much harder. It's you wouldn't have MAGA but for the fact that the oligarchs around Reagan convinced them to end the fairness doctrine. And they said, if you do it, I will start buying up local media, which they did. Clinton came along and his ass kissing of Wall Street. He expanded the Communications Act, and I think it was 1996, expanded the rights of existing corporations to buy more of those. And so they did. And so the sweep of misinformation just from the right and the loss of liberal voices in communities to counter it transform the country into what has led to the base of the MAGA movement. Yeah.
So do you feel like the censorship and the fake news, that the fake news is only coming out of the right wing and that the censorship is only favoring the right wing?
No, I mean, the heaviest censorship and not even censorship, but misinformation comes out of the right wing.
Which sources do you see it coming out of?
Yeah, it just comes, Fox and Kin and most of the grassroots stations doing this work. In terms of alignment with factual reality, liberal media still tends to be way ahead.
Really?
Yeah, but is there areas of liberal media where they're blind and don't cover and misinformed by non-coverage or half coverage? Or sure, plenty. There are.
What do you make of the left-wing media's censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story before the election?
So the best thing I read on the Hunter Biden was that there was no real censorship of it. It was the fact that it was greatly exaggerated. And just last week, the House Republicans had to admit they don't have the information, they don't have the guy doing the information of the stuff with that. So
But people actually,
I have no claim about but the one thing I read that sounded most authentic, which I read about 4 months ago or something like that. I wasn't that interested in the story. Really laid out a very intelligent set of facts that seem to be convincing that it's well overblown. You had a Trump appointee attorney general who Garland decided to leave in place rather than change out, simply because he had the Biden case and said that you have no interference. So if there were bigger things too that they could find to indict him for, this Republican guy on the GOP would have done it. So
well,
that's the best I know about it. So
as I understand it, because I know at the time people were literally being deplatformed from Twitter for reposting the New York Post article, but
I don't know that that's true. And so I don't want to comment on something that may not be true.
No, I get that. But as a journalist, given that the information that they found on the laptop linked both Hunter and his father, who was running for president, with Ukraine, and given that now we're sending billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine, like, do you think that that information would have been relevant? I mean, is relevant now, but also would have been relevant before that election?
So there was a lot of a lot of heavy reporting around the time of the, which I don't remember. But if there was something really breakthrough at that point, what would have come out, because it was under Trump control. They had the investigative authorities to do everything they wanted to do for years, and they could never nail that. And what I know about the Hunter case is the best thing I know is that one piece I read, which I don't remember at the moment all the details of. I'm not concerned about. Hunter Biden is not a threat to the United States of America. and my focus on now is I sort of gave up on the adult generation to save itself, and I'm working on getting the kids to save us from all the bullshit that we have to deal with in the world. Yeah.
I get it. I totally get it. It feels like, I mean, what is your take on, did you ever get to see Plandemic 2, the movie that Mickey and I made together?
I think I saw it at some point. Yeah, I kind of distantly follow the arguments about who's saying what and who's not. And if I find something credible that I think has got chops, I might read it and follow it, but I'm not an expert on this. You know, the one thing I most read recently was about the claim that China came out of the China lab, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a very authoritative piece by the guy who did the best investigation of all this. The scientist did it. And so that looked like Trump propaganda. But but again, I'm not following this daily events the way I used to. And so I don't really want to comment any further about that.
I totally get it. I'm curious though, regarding the censorship issue as a journalist, like that is probably the most censored documentary. Like, even when I've tried to share links in emails, it's been changed. Like, you know, we've both had posts taken down or been deplatformed. Like, do you feel like that is insane? Or like, what do you, I mean, just
Well, I don't know the circumstances behind it. I mean, you know, I don't know. I'm not that familiar with it. I probably watched it once and a couple of years ago, whenever you put it out. And I am not the right person to comment on that or whatever. If I don't know why they did platform you, who did?
I was deplatformed from Tumblr, from Linktree. Anytime I've posted anything related to it, Instagram takes it down, Facebook takes it down. I mean, I've been targeted and suppressed and shadow banned because of writing that. And you know, not to mention all the other things, but just in terms of censorship as a journalist and as a publisher, like, did you ever think that we would come here? Like, how does this line up with a constitutional republic when we no longer have freedom of the press?
Well, there's, first of all, the press, there is no, we have freedom of the press and then to do whatever we want in the press. And then each press institution has the freedom to censor itself as it chooses. That's part of the freedom. So if they say, we don't want to run this and share this with our audience for this or that or Y reason, that's been universal since the day they started the United States of America.
What about people losing like PayPal privileges or credit card processing privileges as a result of articles that they've written or media that they've put out?
That would be criminal.
That's
Why should
happening
anybody lose those
all the
privileges?
time.
Why should anybody lose those privileges? I don't know about this. You're telling me new information.
Yeah, that's Miriam. That's happening to quite a bit. And I know Matt Taibbi's had issues. You know, Miriam Hanine?
Sure, I know Miriam, sure.
Yeah. I know Matt Taibbi's had bank issues since working on the Twitter files.
Bank issues?
Well, losing access to credit card platforms, PayPal.
Really?
Oh yeah, this is rampant.
Well, that would be a major story.
Right.
So if it's a major story, and it's provable, right? What's been the has Matt reached out to and said to like the New York Times and said, okay, you can add some credibility to this, see what's going on. Why don't you take a look at it and get a story out of it?
I don't know him personally, but the other, you know, smaller journalists that I know who are all incurring this, like all of the big papers like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the ones that you've mentioned, are so captured by the left.
Have you collectively put all the data together and gone to them and said to the editor, would you look into this?
I have not, but I know that locally here.
Who has?
I don't know.
If they don't know it's happening, you can't report on it.
Well, I can tell you in my experience here, like when I've reached out to the Santa Fe Reporter, from which I've now been banned, or the New Mexican, or all the papers here about the election interference that I've, you know, done investigative journalism on, or the election audit here was extremely corrupt. They hang up on me, they yell at me, like they're so captured that they're not open to any actual truth that rubs up against the agendas that now they're just propagandizing.
Well, I don't know that, you know, I had enough I don't know what information you're providing, right? When people would come to us, when I was running the weekly or other publications, when people would come to us with stories that we would carefully investigate them. And if they didn't hold up in any reasonable way, right? So, there was stuff we did on AIDS that everybody else wouldn't touch because we look very closely at the information. So if they're not
Stuff
looking,
on AZT.
I actually don't remember. It's obviously some years ago.
Yeah.
So, but we ran stuff about the stuff around AIDS many years ago. So if they're good journalists, they're going to check you out, and if they find that it doesn't hold up, they'll tell you it doesn't hold up.
That hasn't been my experience.
If you go, they'll look at your facts. They'll look at where you took your facts from. They'll look and see if you distorted it, and good journalists will do that and say, "I'm sorry, but here's what I got back, and I'm not going to run this story." And they could keep telling them the same thing over and over again. So I don't know what they did at this little paper in Santa Fe. Right.
Okay.
Right. So,
okay.
So I can't comment. Obviously, if they just dismissed you,
it's not.
If they dismiss you carte blanche, they're not doing their jobs.
Correct. They're not.
If they said after the first approach, "Hey, I found this. Would you take a look at it?" And they came back and said, "No, we won't even look at it."
That's it. They won't even look at it. And these are papers for which I've written before, and I'm a good journalist. Like I've never been, made any sort of big factual errors that have come back in my own journalism.
I don't know because I'm not there. I can't. Right.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned Reagan and what he did to allow more sort of corporate monopolizing. What is your take on Obama's Smith Modernization Act that allowed the U.S. government to propagandize its own people?
I'm not familiar with the act. I can't comment on it. I don't know what that means, propagandize its own people. Everybody's propagandizing all the time.
So the Smith-Mundt Act was, I believe it was in the 30s, and it prevented the U.S. government from using propaganda on its own people. And in 2013, Obama reversed that with the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, which then made it legal.
I'm not going to comment because I have no idea about the reality of that or what happened, etc. So let's talk about kids and not journalism.
Sure. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I wanted to talk about, I thought we were going to talk mostly about our campaign to get emotional intelligence training and life skills called social emotional learning in those schools.
Sure. Tell us about it.
Okay. So in my career, I was innately, because I came from a dysfunctional family, I was innately interested in, as a journalist, in anything that made positive change. I mean, if you had to take down an institution that's causing damage, take it down. But the other side of it is you could find the positive stuff in the world that would make a real difference. Share that with the public. So my first experience, aside from social causes like racism and issues like that, and poverty, my first experience with the inner world, was getting when I was about 22 years old. I got my newspaper in New York to let me do a series on modern therapy techniques and drug addiction. Mm-hmm. And so I went to group therapy sessions and with individual therapy sessions where I could for about several months. And over that period of time, I saw effective change happening in these people. The minds were being changed. They were learning skills to deal with the upsets that they were medicating. They were getting a different mindset on it. and they were getting a feeling of piece by piece, a little bit more sense of empowerment, and learning to deal with ways in the world that they, in different ways, with skill sets and different mindset. So I became a very early advocate of interchange, and it was convincing me something I absolutely had suspected all along and had a sense of, which is that virtually all human dysfunctionality, conflict, individual, collective, right up to the nukes, is because it's a lack of skills and a maltraining historically passed down by hierarchical cultures in how to deal with your inner life, your feelings, your relational lives, etc. And and since you know my first original lecture, where I lay all this out step by step, then it became obvious to me that this was an important movement to cover. And I started writing about it more, both freelance and while I was still in New York, and some follow-up articles. And when I started the weekly, we became the first urban weekly in the country to cover the, what you might call the human development movement, right? With feature stories. We had also alternative health. We had Carolyn Rubin, etc. Alan Bediner for a while was covering at a regular column on transformative issues, and along with everything else we were doing, the anti-imperialism journalism, the getting these smog cleaned up in California, all our investigative reporting. So it remained a feature in the weekly. Michael Ventura and I mostly we took turns interviewing major figures in the world. One of the most fun ones I had was Terence McKenna, who said we put him on the map, on the road map to.
Did you get to interview him yourself, or did Michael do that?
Yeah, I did Terence. Yeah.
How was that?
It was fantastic. We had a great time. We became real buddies, and we enjoyed each other.
Nice.
We visited from time to time if I was up in his area. Kept up. Yeah, it was good.
Cool.
And he opened some other doors, so it was cool. And then, as you know, I started TV network, which was going to have all the same elements of the LA Weekly, but on a national, international level. It didn't work out because they didn't roll out the digital channels as when they said they would. And so I spent 4 years, went through a burnout, decided to take a deeper look at myself and take a break. And so I went to the spiritual psychology master's program at the University of Santa Monica, where I was learning, practicing master's techniques. Masters I knew about, we were practicing techniques, and I found out that I had real chops as a life coach. So
I concur.
You concur. So students would come home and work with me, want to come home and work with me because I was so good in the classroom. So I did that, and within a year, I had like 24 clients a month.
Wow.
And I did that for another year or so, and then banked it down to part-time because I wanted to get back into media. And there were a variety of projects I then endeavored with. And also I started founding additional nonprofits that I thought would make a difference, right? One on focusing on poverty and hunger in Los Angeles was one. Another one was money out of politics. One, because that's the key to the lack of democracy in this country, money in politics. But when I banked it down, I started creating workshops to share what I knew. I think you may come to a workshop before I worked with you directly. I don't remember, but a lot of people did.
I did.
And all those workshops are still online and for free and on YouTube. I can send you the link if you want to share it
Yes, please.
later. And flash forward a few years, and I've been doing some other media companies, and along the way, one of my best friends, my female women sisters, said, "You should talk to my sister, because my sister is on the board of a school in Chatsworth where they're doing this stuff called social emotional learning, and you're going to fall in love with it." So I said, sure. So I went to see this school, and I fell in love because the kids would blow my mind. The way they related to each other, and how smart they were. I'm talking about 8, 9, 10-year-olds. I was thinking I'd like to see them in the White House. The way they solved conflicts with each other, how present they were. And it's because the school had been one of the early ones to really do saturation, social emotional learning, and train the teachers in what's called responsive classroom, a whole other way of dealing with kids and talking to.
What is that?
Responsive classroom?
Yes.
It's a way of being with kids. It's a training in how to be with kids that keeps them, that includes their emotional intelligence and their ability, and how to gain their curiosity without lecturing at them.
Okay.
Right? Gain their interest and stuff. So I started going to other schools, and I saw the same thing in other schools. Okay. So I became an advocate for it. I'm going to tell you the long form story.
Okay.
Okay. And a friend of mine was going to create I won't tell you the whole story, was going to create a new peace organization with an Indian billionaire. He's somebody I had done some executive coaching with. He asked me for guidance about what they should do to get more peace in the world. I said, what are your ideas? And he said, well, Gandhi lectures, more money to this or that peace group, etc. And I said, and they were going to have $20 million the first year. And he said, I said, well, it's all bullshit. It's not going to go. It's being done over and over and over again. How much peace do you see in the world? So I said, peace is a skill set. You can't imagine peace. John Lennon's wrong. You can't imagine peace. It's a skill set. It's a way of learning to know how to be with your own reactive emotions, to attack, to judge against another person, to get out of your divine self and knowingness and into your ego self. So you don't want to be one up or one down. So that's a culture that's got war, that's been passed along generation to generation, as you learn in psych school, how we pass this now trainings along in the thought forms and the belief systems. And so when that's the case, you really retrain the process, the kids, how kids learn. You get the earlier kids, you got to get them early as best as possible. And on the adult side, you got to do what you can on the outside side to get, it's not just therapy, it's retraining. So you might want to, so I said, this is organization, this is social, there's this education movement called social emotional learning. And it's got these great skills. And if you want to create a generation that's going to take down the nukes and recreate, you got to train them to do it. You got to train them to deal with conflict and with each other in a completely different mindset. And it's not the me against you mindset.
What is the mindset?
The mindset is, I'll show you a picture of the mindset. I'm going to change my background for a minute. We use this on the website and other stuff. And I'm going to roll out of the way so you can see this.
Cuteness.
It's what do we do to what's our natural divine loving self going to want to do except be loving and think about what we can play together and co-create together that's going to be keep the world healthy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So just an emblem of it. I'm going to go back to the other.
And would you take that same approach with any of the people who you've referenced as MAGA?
If I meet them, of course, I did, like the guy I spoke to yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
the last couple of days. Sure, of course.
Mm-hmm.
They're divine human beings, and they're just, you know, I've been misguided enough in my life. We're all misguided and infiltrated by the culture. And, you know, so if you're a truth seeker, you recognize the divine essence of another human being, and you don't attack them. You just say, this is, you know, they share information, check this out. Last thing I left them with was, whenever you hear something, just go Google, what's the facts about this and that, and you'll get a lot. And
does it concern you that Google's totally co-opted and that it's
it can be Google or be anybody else. I don't know about totally co-opted.
well, in my experience as a journalist, not to take us off, but like all the truth has been taken off of those searches.
That's nonsense. It's not all the truth has been taken off. There's billions and billions and billions, trillions of stuff out there. You just got to find the stuff that is.
I mean, in my experience, and I've been trained pretty well as a journalist, and I include you as one of my mentors, like the internet has changed really drastically in the past few years, and truth is really buried. And what they're presenting us with in my investigations is nowhere near the truth.
So if I go Google truth and you show up as one document and somebody and your stuff comes up as another document, then I got to make a choice about who I think has done the best factual decisions. So I'm talking about intelligent use of it. So do you say your stuff doesn't show up if you've already?
No, the Weekly's taken down my articles. Reality Sandwich has taken down my articles. Links and information.
Do you post your own articles on your own website?
Well, now I do, but
Okay.
links that used to exist have been taken down. Sites or videos, it's very hard to get to through a lot of these established browsers. Like it's very tricky these days.
Well, okay. I'm not keeping up with modern day Google censorship. I know when I want to find something out on the web.
Do you know that Google is owned by Alphabet?
Yeah, I know Google's owned by Alphabet, but there's a lot of independent stuff out there, like the ones I suggested to you. There's lots of intelligent stuff happening if you keep looking for it. So I want to come back to my story.
Yes.
Okay. So so I said to him, you ought to become an advocate, a global advocate for social emotional learning in all schools globally, and really do a job. And if you want to do something else, you become the equivalence of getting businesses behind it for their employees, right? So we can get some adults starting with nonviolent communication training. So next, he says, well, I'll talk to the billionaire and his team about it, the CEO. And next morning, I got a call, and he said, we want you to run the foundation. So I cut a deal with them, and I'm going to make a very long story short, right? Put together a team, went off to meet the CEO, went to India, met the CEO, and et cetera, et cetera. Didn't meet the billionaire because my friend didn't show up. My friend actually had a breakdown. And at the end of it, some things he did just destroyed the whole project. So that opportunity to do that in the world went away. So I went back to running media companies and doing what I do, right?
Can I ask a question? Where
Yeah,
did social emotional learning and curriculum come from, and when did it hit the culture?
started happening coming out of the 1950s in the post-Freudian movement.
Okay.
So it was a group of, it was a group of people, both in education and therapy, who said, what are the most positive, transformative experiences that we can talk about, that we know exist, that really help people come into a healthier state of mind and healthier relationships, right?
Yep.
And what if we could take those and gamify them and bring them down piece by piece to different age levels and find a way to have these soft skills learned in the schools, right? Like just have it not act out on and hit another kid, right?
Yeah.
Basically, all the basic stuff. And what if we could get their minds more open and to learning? And how would we have to change education and how we teach and what we teach to get the kids? And how can we stop and how can we get the kids to feel better, safer in the schools around themselves? What kind of community processes could we use? And how could we teach them, the basics of conflict resolution skills, so they weren't punching each other out or creating cliques, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So they looked at the best information out there, and they started developing these programs,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then they got some foundation funding to test these programs in a variety of schools.
And this was back in the 50s?
Back in the 50s, they started developing the thinking about it back in the 50s,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then it went on slowly over years.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't put together an organization to really promote it. And at the time, they did a lot of research, et cetera, until late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They
What
started
was the name of the organization?
the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning.
Okay.
And the reason the academic and social emotional learning is there is they decided to call it social emotional learning, which is not a good public sales idea. Oh, it's 1:15 already, Don. Okay. And the and they and then they got this research test. They got some schools to allow for research, and a bunch of schools to allow for research testing.
Mm-hmm.
And they started coming out with really some early stage, but very positive results in terms of student behavior, right? Student satisfaction, right? Higher student grades, higher graduation rates, lower discipline incidents, all that stuff, all the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then over the years, so then they said, okay, now we got to get it out there more to the education community. And so they began getting certain of the programs. They began inviting others who had developed programs to get research money to test their programs. And they would only start recommending programs that had research testing, right?
And who was funding the research?
A variety of foundations. It was mostly or out-of-pocket organizations. There was not a lot of drive to make profit out of this. It was more like, what can we do to transform education so it works for more kids and deals with, shit we see in the schools, gangs, drugs, racism, right? What do we need to elevate the consciousness of kids, though they would not dare near go near the word consciousness, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. So then they launched it and it started growing across the country, right? And infiltrating schools like, finally, years later, Chatsworth, where I got started to see the effects of this, these are remarkable kids. Next thing that happened was, as they grew the movement, right? At some point later in the movement, probably about 12 years ago, right? Some grassroots, there were now more program providers coming into it, more people with this kind of training coming in, hoping to get money to get their programs tested. Schools started even taking on elements of the training, early morning elements of training, bullying training, et cetera, non-bullying training, et cetera. As they learned about, taking in these soft skills learning. Ultimately, it's a curriculum that covers, like, going from 2 and 2 is 4 to advanced geometry, or so these other organizations started cropping up around the country, and mostly was with educators coming together who had learned these skills and want to see it in their schools. So there was a fellow in Boston named Mitch Lyons, who an attorney who wanted his grandchildren, learned about this, wanted his grandchildren to be able to have this experience. And he looked at the movement and said, there's no, like I did, there's no business association among these program providers. There's no public awareness. There's no legislative awareness. School districts, most of the school districts in the country never heard about these programs. What can we do to start making a difference in Massachusetts? So we formed the Massachusetts Social Emotional Learning Alliance, which brought together program providers and educators. And they started growing that movement. And they started having a real effect in Massachusetts. So out of that, states around them that they started forming it. Okay, back to my story. This is so 7 years ago, 6.5 years ago, I was bored running another media company. It's one in the environmental area. I was a publisher. I wasn't the founder. And I wanted to do something. I thought, I got depressed for a bit. I said, this is not the most important thing in the world to do. There's plenty of good stuff out there, and they don't need me. They can replace me here. And I thought, what would I like to do? And I thought, the single most effective social movement, potentially effective social movement in the world to transform a generation from the weirdness, pathologies of our current generations, including all the stuff you find fault about, comes from this maltraining, historical maltraining, and the best thing I've ever come across to change that maltraining and really evolve the mindsets and the human experiences is social emotional learning. That was my conviction. And so I thought, I said, I'm going to do what we couldn't do with the $20 million a year as a start. So I got some friends together, took them to some schools, got them to write some small checks, and we started equip our kids. And our mission was, and it remains, what was missing at that point was majorly parent buy-in and support, parent awareness and buy-in and support. So we focused on that originally. And from there we went, which is all our test ads. Social emotional learning didn't work. Of course, I knew it wouldn't. But emotional intelligence linked to a list of life skills worked like it was clickbait. So
when you said you knew it wouldn't, you mean you knew it wouldn't like work for the
as
kids
a
or
media
work
person, I would never write a headline about social emotional learning.
Got it. Okay.
Right. It's brain deadening term. You got to
Got it.
relate to people. And
Right.
right,
Doesn't really roll off the tongue in like a
right.
sexy, singy way.
So we started having success and building this up. So I started sharing the success with the grassroots organizations out there. So they would start changing how they present it. We started making videos and media for both of ourselves independently. And then we white label it for them, put their logos on it, those organizations. But I also realized at that time that there needed to be more organizations. There were in too few states. They were growing, but they needed to be more such grassroots organizations. Because SEL was still focused on the education community. The grassroots organization needed to focus on, to make a movement, you need public awareness, and you need grassroots support. No movement. That's how you get movements going. So I had Mitch and his executive director mentor me, and I started the California Social Emotional Learning Line. I got a bunch of people in the room. Got them on the conference call line just before Zoom, and of the 30 organizations in the room, 25 said, let's do it. So we started the California Social Emotional Learning, which 4 years ago I got a great executive director. We now have 3,500 educators in the state and members, and really make a difference in the state. And now and then we started working on developing pods and feeding a few years ago, we collectively took the Massachusetts people and founded a national office that allows the state alliances to collaborate and share best practices and help each other. So that's another major piece of the movement. It's now big in the movement. And we still provide the services to them. Separate from that, we help develop pods. We just help so that the national office can now provide already in place websites. So we got three states, southern states, just a week before last, we had the first meeting of the leadership for the Florida Social Emotional Learning Alliance now being formed.
Nice.
I was at the meeting and by Zoom, and we brought some of the people there in our work.
Are you guys getting funding? Like, let's just stick with the California branch. Are you guys getting any funding from California itself or from the California?
Amy doesn't get any funding from, it's all got to be private donors. So
and do any of the private donors require like specific ESG markers for the curriculum, or is that not effective?
No, nothing like that.
Cool.
No. Curriculum is all left to the schools to decide which works best for them in the soup. And because they want to have good results, because they've got to perform and show their domains. They take advice from other principals they know or other soups they know. This has worked for me. They look at they'll test things out that nobody's heard of and find they get great results, even if it's not been tested. But they're getting great results if there's no research proof.
Nice.
So they'll share it. It's a whole mixed bag. There's thousands of programming because it's different age groups get different programs and different programs for different things. So, but overall, the movement's growing, and I've met some of the most wonderful, intelligent, conscious people in my life through it. They're really committed, heart-based, committed people who want to transform the world by transforming the generational expectations. There's a huge amount of evidence about its effectiveness when you do it comprehensively and you do it right. You don't just slap on this or that program because they want you to. Mm-hmm. It's a growth movement. The schools have to learn how to do it. But in our work now, we kind of walk points for the movement. We can test different areas. There's no student movement behind it. So this year we started to organize a student movement behind it. Mm-hmm. So it gets the students themselves demanding it. We've got a really smart student advisory board guiding us on that. We just put together a campaign we're about to launch to get law enforcement behind it, because it's the best thing forever for law enforcement.
Meaning to bring social emotional learning into law enforcement, or
No, to get law enforcement agencies to publicly counter the right wing attack on it by saying,
what is the basis for the right wing attack on social emotional learning?
there's two bases of it. One is it's like a conflated with school moving into doing some equity work around after Black Lives Matter.
Is
So,
there any truth to that?
well, there's truth. What the truth is that the equity work is not social emotional learning, number one.
Okay, so you guys don't have anything to do with equity work.
No, the equity work that happens through social emotional learning is to deprejudice you against another human being, whatever that is, whatever your prejudice.
Does that assume that everyone is prejudiced?
That assumes that if that whatever attitudes you bring in about other human beings, or from whatever, or prejudgments or scare tactics, and don't go with it. This kid is not right, et cetera, et cetera. This is about learning to trust and be co-creative and co-loving with another human being.
So is it reliant on the assumption that the kids are bringing bigotry or racism into the schools before that's been demonstrated?
Schools that deal with discipline incidents and bullying and racial conflicts that exist, right? And they want to heal that and have the students be in there to learn and be present. Find social emotional learning skills where kids learn to deal with this stuff. Extraordinarily helpful.
I would.
So they don't have to say. They don't have to. Well, hang on one second. Can you zoom? Can you pause?
Sure.
Okay. Right.
But is it for schools that, because I'm just thinking, I grew up in Los Angeles, I'm a Cali kid. We didn't have any racial issues in any of my schools. So if a social emotional program was brought in, would they be addressing bigotry and prejudices that hadn't yet been demonstrated, or are they only being targeted towards schools where they're already having
whatever pre-prejudices lead to antagonism towards another human being, right? Social emotional learning addresses, right? One of the biggest things that had to be healed, that social emotional learning started to heal, is attacks on gay kids, and that's still rampant across the country.
So is there LGBTQ related teachings and curriculums that these programs are bringing into schools?
Until kids started forming gay LGBTQ, the movement became involved. Prior to the movement becoming involved, it was simply such and so is going to want to beat up on any kid here that's gay. We got to change that. So the schools have had social emotional learning, and there weren't a lot of them. I mean, it's been it's only in the last 2 years, it's really 3 years, only really exploded. Found relief from that with social emotional learning.
So are the social emotional learning programs directly addressing sexual preference? And if so, at what age are they starting?
They started preschool, and they address acceptance of all kids, no matter what the diversity.
Including MAGA?
Including kids coming from MAGA? Of course.
So is that part of the teaching that accept gay kids?
Well, if a kid comes in from MAGA and he says, I hate gay kids, right? Because that may be part of the MAGA mentality.
Right.
And he's going to go through social emotional learning programs, right? He's going to let go of that training.
And what about for the kids who come in and say, I hate MAGA? Is
hate
that also
Jews.
being addressed? Yeah, exactly.
Anything that deals with uh, 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 negativity towards other human beings is addressed.
Is there any sort of attunement to the fact that kids' brains are so malleable, and maybe kids that hadn't considered this type of bigotry might be being implanted with a lot of separation consciousness with these teachings being brought into the school when kids are,
The,
it's
uh,
preschool?
which we're talking about, you're asking about highly intelligent leadership in schools where you have it, who are sensitive to what works and what doesn't work.
Mhm.
Right? They're not worried about, they're not concerned about um, maltraining the kids. They're concerned about what works to get the kids into a state of mind where their grades go up, where they relate to each other beautifully, where they go out and do projects in the community that they love doing, where they become, happy, fulfilled citizens who respect each other and know how to deal with each other's conflicts. Right?
And so when you mentioned the right-wing
Highly,
criticism of social emotional learning, are there any other aspects, or is it just this stuff?
the two things I spoke on is once the Black Lives Matter happened and some schools started doing such trainings, some schools, very few, did some training that they claimed could be opposed of making white kids feel bad about themselves.
And so were there any?
That's not what social emotional learning does, number one. Number two, the other thing is once they found that parents were, the transgender movement started, right? That led to the transgender movement comes out of the queer movement. So now there's an attack on the gay movement that you can read about every day in the press now, from the right-wing press.
Mostly read about that in the left-wing press.
No, you can read about it in the right-wing press. The right-wing press is all over. These gay kids want to just, pride days. There was a whole group like in Glendale. They, packing demonstrations. There's demonstrations starting around the country about schools that don't toe the line in their thinking about gay kids.
So what is that? What were the demonstrations about? Kids were demonstrating against.
Pride Week. I actually don't remember, because of Pride Week or something like that. Schools supporting Pride Week is.
So do these social emotional learning programs teach young kids about transgenderism?
It teaches kids to respect any kid who not to attack or think clearly. I recently revisited Chatsworth a couple of months ago.
Which
Right?
school?
Chatsworth Community, and there was one kid who was middling between that, right?
Between what?
Between whether he wanted to ever transgender.
How old was this child?
10 years old or something like that, 8, 10 years old, 12 years old, right?
And what's your take on that ambivalence in a child so young?
My take?
Yeah.
Well, my take is I could do a long lecture on this, but to sum it up in 2 sentences, right? The human species is evolving. It's working to get itself aligned with whatever is the innate realities. And the spectrum of sexuality has always been a circle, but it's always been suppressed. And if that form is now present, it's an expression of spirit trying to evolve into a closer sense of reality, right? Do I think kids should transgender? No. I think adults, if they want to transgender, should transgender, right?
Yeah.
I think it takes an adult mindset. That's my own personal opinion.
Mhm.
But the point about it is the setup in the school like that means the other kids are not going to attack this kid and ostracize him and make him wrong or physically attack him, because that's not their dynamic anymore.
Are kids, is there any sort of question about kids maybe becoming too thin-skinned and not developing the tools necessary to deal with what in reality is like a
But
harsh
the reason kids become too thin-skinned because reality doesn't work for them and they know it on an innate level. And they're not being trained to deal with reality. Social emotional learning creates some of the most resilient human beings in human history, because they know how to deal with the reality of the sickness, the pathology, the subversive pathologies of our culture. They've learned not to be reactive to it. They've learned to be some of the leadership of the kid, some of the best stuff happening for in the suicide, increase in suicides is coming out of the leadership, out of teens themselves, creating suicide. The best teen thing was created by teens to deal with suicide.
So
So you have to think of it, the species is evolving in lots of ways, and it's got to evolve faster before we nuke ourselves or ecocide ourselves. And that's a zeitgeist. It's even unconscious, but it's being lived out in lots of people's lives, trying to sense their way to where they're not feeling oppressed or in the world. And that doesn't mean they're getting the skills to be able to act it out. So that thin-skinnedness is the sensitivity to what's not working outside them in the world.
And what happens when that, you know, whether we can describe it as thin-skinnedness or like a real solid rearing with this social emotional education, is this also what's informing when people like want to police other people's language or get upset because you know someone used their wrong pronouns? Like how does that fold into
So
this?
that's part of the reactive state of, you're telling me what's right, I'm telling you, because I still got that judgmental why, but I may not have learned how to tell you, how to get you to pay attention. I'm telling you, I'm taking offense. You want to take offense at me? I'm trained to take offense back, because I'm trained in the old paradigm. I'm the hierarchical paradigm living out, telling you, I don't want you to talk to me that way, right? And you may not like it, but that's me. That's my reality. You don't like me, I don't like you. Right? Kids are trained in social emotional learning and gay are going to talk to the people about that in a completely different way.
And you brought in
Yeah.
gay. So is there like an inextricable binding between social emotional learning and gay?
Is there?
I don't know. You
No,
just
there's only inextricable bonding between your divine self and your ego self.
Mhm.
Either you're going to operate from your divine self and all the loving gifts you have and be retrained in how to be with your own inner reactions and in relationship with others. You go into a relationship, you can destroy it or you can make it beautiful. Your personal relationship, you know?
and
You
are
know how to make it beautiful? No, because you're maltrained. You're trained into like blame and to gift and objectifying and making yourself one up or one down and not wanting to be one down. That's your training. If you,
and what about when it comes to control, like attempting to control external reality or attempting to control other people, other people's beliefs, other people's speech patterns? Like where is
it's
social?
not about control. It's about understanding others and be able to find common ground.
Mhm.
I bring people out of their limitations into where they can heal better. It's about, it's like nonviolent communication for kids. First, we need to understand and then seek to be understood, right? It's about having the inner strength and dynamic inside yourself that you don't get reactive, right? And you can deal with the other person's reactive way in a way that creates self connection, feeling of safety, and then movement towards something positive.
Awesome. Well, I
It is
love.
awesome. It is awesome when it's done particularly right.
Mhm.
And I've been around a lot of kids, and I've seen the leadership, like the leadership of the kids who created um, the suicide play, and they are remarkably evolved human beings
What's the
with a
suicide?
whole different set of languaging and a whole different way of relating to the world. Yeah.
Are these kids who formed a suicide prevention club, or what
Yeah,
is it?
teen, I think the name of it is teen suicide. You can check it.
Okay,
It's not a club. It's who are you going to call if you're a teen and thinking about suicide? Where are you going to get? It's peer to peer.
awesome.
Yeah.
Where can folks support your efforts, support this
They,
whole
they can go to
movement?
equipourkids.org, EQUIPORG.org. Lots of information there. And if they really want to support us, kick in a few bucks, because we do an amazing amount of stuff with a bunch of volunteers and your money will get. We've probably got an amazing little bit of money we've gotten, but give us big money and we'll get more. We probably got at least 2-3 million kids that be able to get this program, if not more.
Awesome.
And we've really helped build the movement in a meaningful way, and there's a lot more work to do.
I love this. I love that you're doing this. Maybe we can bring my pop propaganda class for kids in as well. Jay, I know you have to go. Thank you so much for your time, for all your great work in the world. Thanks for bringing my audience up to speed on this exciting realm of educational evolution.
Okay, great. How big is your audience, by the way?
It's massive.
Oh,
Billions.